Hi, welcome to today's Live with CAFA. Today we're going to be joined by Sage Paul. Sage is a founding collective member and the artistic director of Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto. She is an award-winning artist, fashion designer in her own right, and I am just thrilled that she is going to be joining us today on Live with CAFA. Hi, Sage. How are you?
Hi, good, good. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I was just able to give a itty bitty snapshot of the incredible resume you have of award-winning accomplishments as a designer, as an artist, as a producer, as a creative, as an activist. So I'm just thrilled that you're here to join us on Live with CAFA today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited for it.
So one of the things, of course, as a producer that you're very much a part of is Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto, which, like so many other events, has been postponed due to COVID. How else has your world changed as a result of this time that we're living in? Just to get a little bit of context about how you've been impacted by this bizarre situation before we dig into the rest of our conversation.
Yeah, everyone that I speak to just personally and even in instances like this, I'm always grateful to say that I'm okay. I'm so grateful to have my home, to be here with my husband and our pets. And so in terms of being impacted, usually we work from home. So we are very, very fortunate. Of course, with Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto, it's been postponed and we're having to reimagine what does presentation of fashion look like when we can't physically be together to do that. So that's something in the works, but um, we're trying to get through it. We're rolling with it.
As
Yeah.
we all are, right?
Yeah.
Pivoting.
Yeah.
Well, one of the wonderful things that has happened during this time, it's so nice to talk to someone who's had like a good news story, is Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto did a partnership with our national retailer Simons, featuring a number of Indigenous fashion designers. Congratulations on that, by the by. Can you tell us a little bit about how that partnership came to be, and what does it mean for designers to be on a platform like Simons?
Um, well, it came together. We were on a panel actually with Vicky as well, with the kit. And this is where I met Oceane, and we were talking about the future of Canadian fashion.
And that was
And
just last year.
yeah, so it's been about just over a year in the making of putting this project together. And um, yeah, it was just an alignment of values. You know, we really wanted to see more supporting more locally. Of course, I want to work with Indigenous designers and increase that visibility for Indigenous designers. And I think that kind of spreads to like just creating more diversity in the fashion industry. Um, so that's how it started. And it's been about a year of getting together a group of 8 Indigenous artists to embellish the garments. And what does it mean for Indigenous designers in general, to have a platform like that? Um, the great thing is designers are able to reach new markets. In the Indigenous community, I think we're very supportive of supporting the Indigenous economy or our local economies, and having reach to new markets, I think, is really great for growing our businesses and growing the visibility that we have, and hopefully in a way that we want to be sharing, because I think there's a lot of cultural elements that I think are very special to our communities that I don't think we would put on a platform like this. But by having the leadership in this relationship, we were able to present work and have the designers create their work in a way that they are happy with and seeing on a mainstream platform like this. I also think it's really important for audiences and for customers to have access to new design and new fashion that they might not see otherwise. And it really expands our almost one-dimensional notion of what fashion is. Because we're working with artists, visual artists, crafts artists, fashion designers. So it was a really incredible group of designers who are working in all ways with fashion. It just wasn't the typical understanding of creating something to sell.
Okay, there are so many things I want to ask you about that. But first, for people who haven't had the pleasure of going to the website and seeing the designs that are there, you just touched on it a little bit, that there are artists who are asked to, or were invited to, embellish different garments. So can you talk a little bit about like what the garments are? Because it's a really interesting way that the collections have been put together.
Yeah, well, it was a new partnership, not just for us for IFWTO or for the designers, but also for Simons. So there was a lot of learning that we had to go through, not just in terms of what the clothing is going to look like, but what that relationship is. You know, working with, working locally, I think that we face many different kinds of problems or requirements when we're running a business. So we had to work in that way to make sure the designers were happy, to make sure that, you know, that there was an appropriate delivery time, to make sure there was a, a manageable quantity of deliverables to be able to, that the designers could send, but also making sure that Simons was flexible in terms of when those dates were and not pushing too far. The designers, so there were 8 designers, Carolyn Monet, who I'm wearing. I'm going to go back and buy more pieces.
So many are sold out. I went to
Yeah.
buy some things and it was like, not available, not available.
Yeah,
Yay!
I think it's such a great problem to have, and I'm so happy about that. So I am waiting for Ingenuity's, because I think I want to get one of Ingenuity's dresses, but I can't decide yet. So there's 8 designers. Ingenuity is a mother-daughter duo, which I just love. They live in Northern Ontario. They're pretty remote. So even just shipping garments to and from them. So all the designers were asked to embellish garments that we ship to them. So that was a challenge in itself, is like working with completed garments. But because it was such a big project, we didn't want to like have designers creating garments as well as embellishing, because just that craft and that art in itself is a very long, tedious process, and beadwork goes for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So to have beadwork, for example, from Neo Perkins on these dresses, I think is such a gift and a nice entry point for a broader audience to be able to see this kind of work and know what goes into it. So the designers received their garments, they embellished them. Neo did beadwork, and she's Haudenosaunee, so this kind of Haudenosaunee beadwork. We had Ingenuity, they're Anishinaabe, so they did Anishinaabe kind of applique design. Tracy Toulouse is also Anishinaabe, and she did this. She has an iconic floral design that she works on, and so she was able to incorporate that into her designs. Warren Stevens Scott, who I think many people know for his earrings, he was able to incorporate those West Coast form line abstracts into his work. We worked with 2 visual artists, Jordan Bennett, who's done lots of work in retail and garments and accessories and stuff like that. And then he's from the West Coast, and he's Mi'kmaq, and which is really awesome because he does these beautiful prints that are based on Mi'kmaq quill work and these very traditional, beautiful quill work designs. And he does them into these visual art. And it's just, I get a modern, contemporary experience of that kind of work that is really old and comes from generations of families. Who else? Evan Ducharme, who is just like, his fashion is just incredible. I would just love for him to collaborate and do a full collection with Simons. But what he did was this embroidery that is from his community. He's Métis, and he had people from his community producing it. Oh, and another really exciting one is Tanya Larson. She hand painted every garment that would match the color of red ochre. And red ochre comes from from the Arctic, Canadian Arctic, and Indigenous communities up north, Dene communities, would use this pigment for various, sometimes ceremony, I think for dyeing things. I don't know the full history. Definitely have to check out Tanya Larson to learn more about it. But to have that connection to the earth is so beautiful. And it's a very minimal design that I just think is it's so classic. I'm sure I'm forgetting designers, Ingenuity, but there's 8 designers total. Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like it's a wonderful way, like you've mentioned, a broader audience a couple of times. So it's a way for people to even understand a little bit about the artistic differences between Anishinaabe or Métis or West Coast or Central Canada.
Mm.
For people who are looking at those garments or maybe even thinking now, is it okay if I'm not of Indigenous descent is it okay for me to wear these garments? Like, is that appropriation? How do you answer that question for people who are, white girl who's
Can I do
like, is that
it?
okay?
Yeah, this is, it's so important to support the Indigenous fashion community. It's a part of our local economy when we're thinking Canadian economy, and an Indigenous person, a Native person would not sell you something that you shouldn't be wearing.
That's
So
such a good point. They're not going to sell you something sacred that would therefore be appropriation. Like, this is it's a different form.
yeah, which is so exciting for a project like this. It's like, who the designers are. Simon's took the care to make sure that they, knew about the work that we were doing, so that it was presented in a good way and it comes from an authentic place of Indigenous representation.
So, something, and I know we've had this conversation before, pardon me, it's hard enough to be a fashion designer, at the best of times. What's the experience like as an Indigenous fashion designer? From your perspective, working as a designer and as an artist, are there challenges that are specific to the Indigenous community, or are there specific experiences that maybe you would like to share that can help people understand what it's like to work in this industry
Yeah.
as an Indigenous artist?
um, I think, well, I can't speak for all Indigenous
Of
people, but from
course.
my own personal experience, it's very challenging. There's one idea of what fashion is, and it comes from it goes back into, I think, the 1400s, where it was founded in Western Europe specifically for an elite group of people, and that's what people think fashion is. And fashion studies will go into all of that. But meanwhile, all cultures have had fashion since we wear clothes. I think of our visual language. We probably had that visual language before we were even speaking languages, and so it's existed forever. And it's a huge frustration of mine to be working within this fashion industry that is really still stuck in that one way of thinking. And things are changing, and it's really exciting to see that change. But with that Euro-Western focus, it's another part of everything we're experiencing right now in terms of racism, is that comes with the oppression, the marginalization, and this is an institutional separation that I think a lot of people not in the mainstream industry experience, and just gaining that access is very challenging and really hard. And there's we have different cultures, so we communicate in different ways, and we have different understandings for what should be in different kinds of ways. So that is definitely a struggle. And what I've really grown to love is that the Indigenous fashion community is so vibrant and so supportive, and we really work in within our own community. And I don't think that's in a being a separate kind of way. It's really allowing us to be able to celebrate our culture and where we come from and the kind of work that we're doing. So I it's like it's two worlds, and there's always room for collaboration and always room to be working together. Yeah, I'd like to see that happen more, but in a way that is balanced and reciprocal, where there is Indigenous leadership, or Black, Indigenous, people of color are leading in what the fashion industry looks like. Not just us trying to be a part of the industry,
but more expanding what the industry is, as opposed to fitting a piece into something that, like, let's change the pie, as opposed to fit another piece. And I'm awkward analogy there, but
no, I get what you're saying though.
Indigenous Fashion Week
My mom's
is
here. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Sage's mom. I want to talk a little bit about Indigenous Fashion Week because 2020 would have been the second iteration of it, correct?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit, again, putting together a fashion week of any kind is a massive undertaking. And, at the first iteration, like there were designers coming from further points of the world than I can even imagine. What was it like having that experience of having so many Indigenous designers together all in one spot?
It felt like home, like family. It's so incredible. The Indigenous communities, there's such we're Indigenous communities are around the world. Everyone I feel like is Indigenous somewhere. And there's such like a groundedness like in that heart of community, even though it's a total it's such a global movement, this Indigenous fashion. And you could really feel that when we were there. And we present nearly 100 designers. So, and that includes on our runway 23, but in our marketplace, in our panels, our workshops, our art exhibit. So having everyone come to one place, and we have such different nations, such different cultures globally as Indigenous people, but being able to share that, and I think a lot of our values and those crossovers, what our values are, allow us to celebrate that. And it takes a long time to put on an event like that because it's a multi-platform festival, and we put a lot of work into making sure that there's the space for that diversity within Indigenous communities, and also that we're connecting with the fashion industry and the arts world. And it takes a lot of work. We give ourselves 2 years because myself and my collaborators, Heather Haynes and Carrie Swanson, we also do other stuff. So, I do design work and I do costume design, and they do their other work. So we want to make sure that we're giving the time to do justice for the artists. We want to create the best space for their work to be presented to audiences that exist, new audiences. So this year, it's so unfortunate that we've had to postpone, and it has been 2 years in the making, but we are looking at reimagining. Okay, what can we do? And we're just launched a campaign to continue to celebrate Indigenous designers. Just because IFWTO has been postponed doesn't mean all of these designers, are waiting for this. We have to continue to work. So these designers, we want to be able to share them on our platform, so that hopefully people can go see what they're doing. Maybe they have an online show. Maybe they are releasing a project like the one we did with Simon's, or maybe they just have their online shop. So we just want to be able to share what their vision is, because it's so much more than just selling clothes. It's a part of a culture. It's sharing, generations of knowledge. So the one we're working on now is it's my IFWTO look. So we're just sharing every day videos from our designers. So I actually get to hear from the designers. Yeah.
That's so cool.
It's so much fun.
I was just thinking, as you were saying that you put 2 years in between the shows, that, one of the big discussions that's been happening within, the greater fashion community is how do we reevaluate the fashion calendar to make it more sustainable and more in line with, what's been happening. So I think you're incredibly ahead of your time to be going.
Cool.
You're on it.
Awesome.
You talk about, where you're going to be sharing their looks and stuff like that. Is IFTO, is it IFTO look you were just saying? That sounds like one of the best places to.
My IFWTO look. It's on our Instagram, IFW Toronto, and it's the most recent post.
Because it sounds like, and I've been talking to other designers about this, that exposure, like just awareness, is such an important piece of the puzzle for everyone. Because of course, if people don't know about you, then how are they going to find you, to appreciate you, to purchase from you, all of that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Are there other ways that IFTO is going to be illuminating the stories? Like, are there other pivots that you can share a little bit, or are we just going to have to follow along and see as things are released?
We'll have to wait. My team would be like, Sage, we're not ready. we are working on making sure that we are able to get things up and running in a way that works. There's so many pieces to the puzzle. We work with Harbourfront Centre, and of course they're shut down. And our team, we work with, like I said, almost 100 designers. So we just want to be strategic. And I don't think, especially now, like we're all pretty much in isolation. So I think like, let's take this time to do this in a really good, thoughtful way. And we'll definitely be sharing as soon as everything is ready to go, but we will have more for this year that we'd like to share.
In speaking with the designers that you work with on IFWTO, and obviously they come from around the country, even though around the continent, really, even though the show is here in Toronto. How has COVID been impacting some of the designers that you've been speaking with? Is it sort of like the same no matter where you are? We're isolating, supply chains have been broken, just sort of waiting to see how we're going to come out the other side of it? Or are there any specific stories that you can share about how COVID is impacting designers?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of similar experiences with like, just being able to sell, especially in, I think, the craft world and the local design world. A lot of people do trade shows and marketplaces. And so that's been an area that's been hit really hard in terms of selling work. Also with presenting work, if designers are showing beadwork or applique or garments they've designed in galleries, those are all closed also. One interesting thing that I saw and shows the resilience of Indigenous communities is Tanya Larson again. She works a lot with hand-tanned hide. So that's leather that she does on her own, and usually she works with the community to tan the leather. And so it's a long process. It's very laborious and takes a lot of work to create leather by hand. And it's just the most beautiful thing. And the smell is amazing. But she can't do her urban hide tanning now because the community can't come together because of COVID. So this is one way that has been an issue, but there's being resilient and being resourceful, I think, is so important to remember at this time, is not to see these barriers that we're being faced. Like Indigenous people face barriers all the time. And there's so many front lines that we're constantly having to face and be on. But being resilient in terms of Tanya she still was able to get a hide from the hunters, and she's brought in the people in her household who don't usually tan hides to go along that with her. And, they're just supportive of each other and making sure that she's still able to have this material that is vital to her artistic practice, to her business, and she's just doing it. So I think there's still like light if we look for it.
Always light.
Yeah.
As you were talking about Tanya's work, and you've also mentioned, embroidery, beadwork, I couldn't help but think how long it must take these designers and artists to create their work, and what a contrast that is to, we've become so used to, I want it, I buy it now, like that instant gratification, and that you really are getting a piece of artistry when you support an Indigenous designer, because of the hours at a basic level, just the hours, not to mention the skill and the heritage and the artistry that goes into it, just the amount of time it takes to create these works. Is that a fair thought or learning?
Definitely. My sister learned to be my sister's just an expert beater. I swear, like she is like my grandma right? But so my sister is this master beater, and she learned from my auntie. My auntie learned from my grandma. So this is generations of practice. So there's the literal hours that you take to beat a piece of whatever you're beating and whatever you choose to beat. But those generations of being able to pass on that knowledge, the designs, because in our communities, you can kind of tell where very cultural community-based designs come from, just based on what the florals look like or whatever the imagery is. And so it really is, there's so much that goes into it. It's not I find fashion industry so interesting in terms of that entitlement. It's like, I want this, I want it now, and I want it to be affordable. I'm the customer and it should be accessible to me. But these designers who come from this lineage that are carrying on these cultural practices and keeping this art alive, it's so much bigger than just like, I want it now. It's definitely got to be a reciprocal relationship that is, you know, one side is also understanding what they're getting from that beadwork or whatever other practice it is.
That is such a good point, that fast fashion really is about the entitlement of the consumer. I want what I want when I want it at a price that I am willing to say is acceptable for what that is. That is such a powerful perspective.
Well, yeah, it's so true. And we work really hard to like try to shift that. And, you know, and the Simon's collection was, you know, some people feel like it's not accessible enough, but when we consider the amount of work that goes into it, that every single piece in this garment was manufactured here. The designers touched every single garment, and that's so unusual. You know, usually a designer will design their idea here and then it'll go overseas, and then it's produced like in India where their embroidery is masterful, right? But that's for a reason, right? And now they've created this industry around that, but it's very different. And I think having this here, knowing that the work done is here is really, really special.
Well, and what is incredibly accessible, that I don't think anyone could argue with, is the garments themselves. Like the shapes are so size accessible. Like they're beautiful t-shirts and dresses and pants and tunics that are just so easy for anyone to wear. So if people haven't gone to Simon's to check that out, the garments themselves are not only beautiful, but really, really accessible from a body perspective.
Oh, for sure. I love my, it's such a nice fit. It's perfect for summer. They're linen cotton, so they just feel nice, but there are French seams in the top, which I don't know.
Okay, tell everyone what a French seam is, please, Sage.
A French seam is basically you have to sew the seam twice. So you sew it once with wrong sides together and then again right sides together, so then the inside of the seam is clean and you don't have the serging. It's just a really beautiful finish. It takes longer, but it's so nice. And to see that like in this garment that is a part of this project with IFWTO, like it's just a very, very beautiful project, right from the construction of the garments to the meaning behind all of the prints and embroidery and beadwork that you'd see. Yeah.
We're getting ready to wrap up, but a couple just, you know, final questions is, you know, there's been, and we've touched on this a little bit, but I'm just wondering if you have any final thoughts on the fashion industry is notoriously exclusive, I should say, exclusive, and notoriously white dominant. And this is something that wonderfully there are more and more conversations and talking about, you know, yes, it is, and how can we change that, and what needs to happen, be it from internal hiring practices to the shelf space for different designers and different business owners, to more diversity in terms of marketing and who we see in the ads and campaigns and photo shoots. Do you have any thoughts on what the fashion industry needs to do to pivot to have a more equitable future? What would you, Sage Paul, like to see?
This is such a big question.
I know, right?
It's, oh my gosh, especially with everything that's going on right now. It's so, with like Black Lives Matters, it is so apparent now more than ever that there needs to be systems put in place that support all of our fashion, whatever that is, and the work that we're doing. For me, I see it as putting Indigenous people, Black people, people of color in positions of leadership and positions that are decision-making positions, because a lot of the time we're like, let's collaborate with this Indigenous person, but it's almost superficial, where an Indigenous person isn't able to make decisions. And because you're working with such a large company, it's it can be intimidating to even put yourself out there, to allow those decisions, to offer your opinion and offer your position of change that you want to see. But if we just, I think if we are put in positions of leadership and given the go ahead, just go ahead and do the work that needs to be done, I think that some change could start to be seen there. It has to happen. I mean, the fashion industry too is just, I think it's really hurting.
Yeah. Hello.
I hate to say that I work in the fashion industry, but oh my gosh, when I just see like, people are just so afraid to let go of this power, and we're never going to grow. We're never going to move forward if these people at the top, who are mostly rich, affluent, white people, are not prepared to let go of a little bit of power so that we can start to see a better industry. That we're a global industry, and there's many different kinds of people out there. Yeah.
I love the analogy of how the forest fire, when it decimates the fire and there's scorched earth, it's often from that a more fruitful, stronger, more robust plant will grow. And I hope that is part of what is happening to the fashion industry right now.
I hope so. I hope so. It sounds like everyone's changing. And then I saw Chanel was like, nope, we stand by our whatever number of seasons they do. And I was like, okay, maybe they're not getting it. So, it's gonna be a long road, but it's really encouraging to see that even just having the conversations, I think is a move there. I saw Ben Barry at Ryerson today posted today all of the actions that they are actually taking to make sure that they are more diverse and that they are including diverse perspectives in terms of how their institution runs. It's not just like on the face, here's some Native people, here's some Black people. Like they are legitimately including more diverse voices, and also offering training to white people.
Amazing.
Yeah, to understand like what do these new systems look like and how do we build these new systems together.
Sage, we've talked a lot about Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto, which is obviously close to your heart, but what's on the horizon for you as a designer and an artist? Because I know you are a busy, busy woman with lots of projects on the go. What can we look forward to Sage Paul creating in the future?
Well, I actually have some pieces up at BACA, the gallery in Montreal. They're rawhide harnesses, and I just love them. I won't go into the meaning behind them. You just go check out the website. It's so hard to talk about my own work as it is to talk about everything else I care about. But yeah, I have pieces at the BACA right now. I'm working on a really beautiful gown. The pattern drafting on it is insane, but it's on my reserve at mile 30. There's a Mother Mary altar in the middle of the bush. Like this is the boreal forest, just in the middle of nowhere. There's this thing, and my grandma was very religious. That's a part of the missionaries and colonization and stuff. But I just find it so interesting that she's at this entry point to the forest, and so I just want to create this kind of matriarch because I didn't get to know my grandma for very long, but just having her as this entry point for me, and just that connection and how much my dad loves her. And I want to create this Mother Mary entity in this. So I'm working on that. It incorporates rawhide, and it's like the biggest dress I've ever made.
Wow.
But I hope to have it done by the time COVID lets us out.
And when do you think that will be, Sage Paul?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I hope it's soon. Honestly, I feel like we're all going to be under pretty strict restrictions until mid next year, if not longer. Yeah.
It will force us all to reinvent and be resilient and pivot, and new things will grow.
Yeah. Yep.
Sage, thank you so much for being here. And for people who just joined, I want to reiterate one thing you said earlier in the talk, and this will be shared on our on CAFA's IGTV and on Facebook, so people can watch it in its entirety if you were just joining us midway through. But when we were talking about appreciating versus appropriation, you said something that I think everyone should take in, is that an Indigenous designer or a designer from any cultural background is not going to sell you something, is not going to create something that would be appropriation if you wore it. Mm-hmm. That to me is just like yes.
The lights went off.
I don't know. I mean, I like that just puts it so simply though. Like, you know, they're not going to create something that they're selling that wouldn't be appropriate for everyone to have and wear. And I think that is such an important message for people to realize and to take in, because that is the nature of being a fashion designer, is you are designing for people to appreciate and wear and put on that which you create. And that is, I just thank you for putting it in such beautifully simple terms, because I think that is an incredibly important just sort of thing for people to wrap their heads around. Pardon?
Riley's saying not necessarily.
Oh,
Riley, what do you
type in Riley?
Yeah, let's hear. Riley's PhD at Ryerson, and is okay. So you know him.
Yeah, no, Riley is a smart man, and you know, I'm just it's COVID. We totally have time. Or if we're just waiting for Riley to chime in, or maybe what we can do is we can, because I do really want to hear what Riley has to say, because obviously we don't want to make blanket statements that would apply to everyone. And it is, you know, people design for all kinds of reasons. So obviously it's important to speak to the designer if you are not sure, and do your due diligence to understand, you know, maybe there is something very specific that they are designing for or about that would make it, and maybe there is a very specific audience. So that would be important to realize. I see a comment coming in here. Riley, is that you? Oh, the scrolling is so awkward.
The schooling, the education system it's very challenging. I teach at George Brown, and the system, there just isn't enough supports in the system to be able to offer a program that is going to ever share enough. And I just find it very, very challenging to be able to offer everything. A lot of people come in just knowing nothing. There's a number of international students, which is very exciting, but then we're experiencing a language barrier in terms of being able to communicate this, for me, knowledge around Indigenous fashion. And then there's just not enough resources to bring in more voices. So it's just very one-sided with me speaking about the knowledge that I have, but not being able to bring in people like Riley, for example, or whoever to go dive deeper into it. And yeah, the schooling system is, it's you know, everything needs work. Everything
and learning is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes.
So, you know, so when we learn anything, it's a constant process and it's a constant evolution, and I think that's, you know, important for everyone to realize as we all navigate through this world.
Yes.
Right. Well, Sage, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone who's joined us on Live with CAFA today. On Thursday, I'm actually going to be talking with Catherine Adai, who is the creative director and founder of the line Kayla K. And we're going to be talking about her designs, her experience as a Black designer, and looking forward to having that conversation with her. So you can join us here on Instagram Thursday at noon. Sage, thank you so much. As usual, you have been a source of light and inspiration, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me today. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the sunshine.